All right, let's dive right into Hebrews 2.118. It's a pretty amazing passage, really about getting the whole picture of just how significant Jesus is and the salvation he offers us, right?
You got it. And we've got some really cool stuff to help us unlock some of the deeper meaning here. We've got, of course, the verses themselves, but also some timelines and a couple of study guides that I think will really bring some of these ideas to life.
Awesome. So let's not waste any time. Why don't we jump into the first few verses, Hebrews 2.1 to 4. There's this like urgent warning right off the bat. It's almost like a siren going off saying, hey, wake up, don't miss this.
It's serious stuff, right? And it compares ignoring Jesus's message to what happened when the angels disobeyed, which, if you remember the Old Testament stories, that did not go well for them.
Not at all. It definitely makes you pay attention. Like, okay, I need to listen up because this is huge.
Exactly. I mean, the author's basically saying if something spoken by angels was so important, and if there were major consequences for blowing them off, imagine how much more serious it is to ignore the salvation that comes through Jesus himself.
Wow, that's powerful. And it makes me appreciate how much emphasis the writer puts on the validity of this whole message. Our sources highlight that this wasn't just some made-up story. Jesus himself proclaimed this salvation. It was confirmed by all those who saw him in action. And then on top of that, God himself was backing it up with signs and wonders. Like, talk about a strong case.
Right. It's like a triple confirmation. You've got the eyewitness testimony, you got the evidence, and you've got the divine stamp of approval. You can't really argue with that.
No kidding. So we've established this message is super important, but then we come to this idea in Hebrews 2.599 about the world to come. And it says it's not going to be ruled by angels, but by humans, with Jesus leading the way. I have to admit, this is where I get a little confused. Didn't Psalm 8 talk about how humanity was supposed to have dominion over creation? I mean, looking around, it doesn't exactly seem like we're ruling things perfectly right now.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Psalm 8 paints this picture of humanity as the caretakers of creation, crowned with glory and honor. But like you said, we're not quite there yet. But Hebrews seems to be saying that this dominion, this true fulfillment of our purpose, it comes through Jesus.
Okay, so how do angels fit into all of this? Because the passage says Jesus was made a little lower than the angels, but then crowned with glory and honor. Why would he go through that? It seems like a step down.
That's what makes it so incredible. The author of Hebrews is really emphasizing Jesus' humility. He was already divine, full of glory, but he willingly took on human form, humbling himself even to the point of death. But it wasn't a defeat, it was an act of love. By becoming fully human, experiencing our limitations and weaknesses, he becomes the perfect bridge between us and God.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture. But then we get to Hebrews 2.9 to 10, and it says Jesus was made perfect through suffering. Now, how does suffering lead to perfection? That doesn't really make sense at first glance.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive for sure. But this is where the idea of Jesus as the captain of our salvation is so important. The sources we have explain that through his suffering, Jesus experienced the full range of human experience. He faced temptation, he endured pain, and ultimately he conquered death itself. And it's precisely through that victory that he becomes able to bring sons unto glory.
So it's not just about avoiding punishment, but about being transformed, reaching our full potential as God's children. And Jesus, because he walked that path, becomes our guide.
Exactly. He knows the way because he walked it himself. He understands our struggles because he faced them head on, and his victory gives us confidence that we can overcome too.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, moving on to the next section. In Hebrews 2.1 and 13, it struck me how Jesus isn't ashamed to call us brethren. It seems like a much deeper connection than just master and servant.
Absolutely. It speaks to a real family bond. Our sources unpack this using the idea of sanctification, which basically means being set apart for God's purpose. And what's so cool is that the passage highlights how both Jesus and those who believe in him share a common lineage, like a spiritual family.
So we're all on the same team, working toward the same goal. I like that.
It's a beautiful image of unity and shared purpose, and it sets the stage for this incredible contrast between the spiritual family and the enemy of our souls, which we'll talk about next time.
You mean in Hebrews 2.14:15, where Jesus takes on flesh and blood to battle the devil? It sounds epic.
Oh, it is. We'll unpack all the powerful imagery and symbolism in the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait. This has already been so insightful.
Me too. It's amazing what you discover when you really slow down and dig into these verses. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into Hebrews 2.1 to 18. Last time we were talking about that urgent warning to really pay attention to Jesus's message and his unique place in all of creation, how he chose to become fully human. And we left off with this idea of Jesus as a merciful and faithful high priest. So I think it's time to unpack that a bit more, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. That whole high priest thing has always kind of intrigued me. It makes me think of all those ancient rituals and sacrifices. But I'm not really sure how it all connects to Jesus and to us today.
That's a great question. Our sources really dig into the Old Testament background of the priesthood. Remember, in the Old Covenant, the high priest was like the VIP, the key player. He was the mediator between God and the people, offering sacrifices for their sins and speaking to God on their behalf.
So it was like having a special representative to go to God for you.
Yeah.
Because ordinary people couldn't just waltz into the Holy of Holies and have a chat with God, right?
Exactly. The high priest had the sacred responsibility to bridge that gap, to represent the people before a holy and righteous God. And Hebrews is drawing this powerful parallel between that Old Testament role and Jesus.
Okay, so I'm seeing the connection. But what makes Jesus' priesthood different? I mean, he didn't do all those elaborate rituals with the incense and the animals, did he?
That's what's so amazing. Jesus's priesthood goes way beyond the limits of the Old Covenant. He doesn't offer animal sacrifices. He offers himself, the ultimate sacrifice, once and for all.
Wow, that changes everything. But what does it mean for us, practically speaking?
Think of it this way. Because Jesus lived a full human life with all its joys and sorrows, because he experienced temptation, suffering, even death, he
Hmm.
can relate to us in a way no other high priest ever could. He gets it. He understands our struggles, our weaknesses, our fears. He doesn't just offer forgiveness from a distance. He offers compassion and empathy because he's been there himself.
It's like having a friend in the highest place. Someone who knows the rules, but also knows our hearts.
Exactly. And it brings us back to those big questions we've been talking about. How does understanding Jesus' willingness to suffer for our salvation change how we see the challenges in our own lives?
Right? If Jesus endured so much for us, then we can face our own trials with courage and hope. It's like he's saying, hey, I've been there, I get it, and I'm here for you.
Absolutely. His example gives us strength and inspiration. It's not about seeking out suffering, but about facing it with faith, knowing we're not alone in the fight. We have the ultimate victor fighting for us and alongside us.
That's so encouraging. And, we talked earlier about how Jesus isn't ashamed to call us brethren. That sense of belonging, of being part of a spiritual family, it comes up again and again in this
It
passage.
does, doesn't it? It's woven through the whole text. Remember how Hebrews 2.11 says he shares in our flesh and blood, that he took on the seed of Abraham? It's all pointing to this profound connection, this unity we have with Christ and with each other.
One of the key takeaways from our sources is the importance of community. It's not enough to just know about Jesus and his sacrifice. We need to live it out together in relationship with others.
Couldn't agree more. We need each other, for support, encouragement, accountability, inspiration. We can practice what we've learned together, sharing our insights, our struggles, our victories. We can challenge each other to grow, to stretch, to become more like Christ.
And that's where things get really exciting. It's not just about our own personal transformation. It's about making a difference in the world around us. As we become more like Christ, we naturally become channels for his love, his grace, his healing power.
It's like a ripple effect, isn't it? The more we let God's love change us, the more we can pass that love on to others, impacting our families, our communities, and ultimately the whole world.
And remember that powerful image of Jesus battling the devil, the one with the power of death. It reminds us that we're in a spiritual battle, but we're on the winning side. And by living out these truths, we become part of pushing back the darkness and advancing God's kingdom.
That's right. So in the last part of our deep dive, we're going to explore how all these amazing truths from Hebrews 2.1 to 18 can be lived out in practical, everyday ways, both individually and as a community of faith.
This is getting me pumped. Can't wait to see how it all comes together in the final part of our deep dive. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into Hebrews 2.1 to 18. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we? From that urgent call to pay attention to Jesus' message, to his incredible position as both fully human and fully divine, and then his role as our compassionate high priest. It's been amazing. But now I'm really curious to see how all of this translates into practical, everyday living.
That's the key, right? It's one thing to understand all the theology and the concepts, but how do we actually live it out? How do we make it real in our lives?
Exactly. And I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I mean, we've talked about so much. Where do we even begin to apply all of this?
One of the things our sources really emphasize is that this whole idea of salvation through Jesus, it's not a passive thing. It's not like you just check a box and you're done. It's an active, ongoing process of being transformed, of becoming more and more like
So
Christ.
it's more like a journey than a destination.
Exactly.
It's not just about saying a prayer and then coasting through life. It's about actively pursuing a relationship with God, letting His Spirit work in us and through us.
Right. And that active pursuit can take all sorts of forms. It might mean spending time in prayer or reading the Bible. It could be serving others or just being more intentional about reflecting God's love in our relationships.
One of the study guides we looked at put it this way. It said, living out the truths of Hebrews 2.1 to 18 is like setting out on this lifelong adventure with Jesus as our guide. It's a journey of discovery, growth, transformation. And like any good adventure, it will have its challenges and setbacks, but also moments of pure joy and excitement.
I love that analogy, and it reminds us that we're not meant to go it alone on this journey. Remember, Hebrews 2.11 talks about how we're all part of the same spiritual family, brothers and sisters in Christ. We're united by our faith and our calling.
So community is essential, right?
Absolutely. We need each other for support, for encouragement, to hold each other accountable, and to inspire one another.
It's like we can practice what we're learning together, sharing our insights, our struggles, our victories along the way. And we can challenge each other to grow and to stretch, to become more like Christ.
That's when things get really exciting. It's not just about our own personal transformation. It's about making a difference in the world around us. As we become more like Christ, we naturally start to reflect His love and grace and healing power to others.
It's like a ripple effect. The more we let God's love change us, the more we can share that love with others, impacting our families, our communities, and eventually the whole world.
Exactly. And remember that powerful image of Jesus battling the devil, the one who holds the power of death. It reminds us that we're part of this cosmic struggle. But we're on the winning side. And as we live out these truths, we're actively pushing back the darkness and advancing God's kingdom.
So powerful. As we wrap up our deep dive into Hebrews 2.1:18, what's the main takeaway? What are we supposed to do with all these amazing insights?
Don't let them stay just abstract ideas. Put them into practice in your everyday life. Make time for prayer and reflection. Find community and support. And look for opportunities to share God's love with those around you.
That's a great challenge. And remember, we don't have to do this alone. We have Jesus, our compassionate high priest, interceding for us and guiding us. We have the Holy Spirit empowering us. And we have each other.
That's what makes it all so beautiful. It's an adventure we're meant to share. So keep exploring, keep diving deep into God's love, and let's live out its transformative power in the world together.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through Hebrews 2.118. Until next time, keep seeking, keep discovering, and keep diving deep.